Hello, I'm Dr. Kai Matthews, founder of the Liberatory Classroom, and today I'm going to talk to you about the barriers to diversifying California's teacher pipeline. This data that I'm about to share was collected over a 2-year period. We interviewed higher education leaders from the Cal State system, UC system, community college, private institutions. We conducted focus groups with pre-service teachers, and we also surveyed over 4,600 California teachers on issues related to job satisfaction, diversity and inclusion at the school site, and their general perspectives on teacher preparation. And so this is what we found. 1 in 5 teachers expect to leave the profession within the next 3 years. In addition to those who said that they probably or definitely we will leave, we have an additional 22% that say it's a coin toss, a 50-50% chance that they'll leave in the next 3 years. And this data was collected 3 years ago. And so the result of this is what we're seeing right now with our current teacher shortages across the state. There's plenty of research on the various barriers to teaching and to teacher recruitment and retention, and they generally fall within these 5 buckets. And these are barriers, of course, for all teachers, but especially so for those who have been historically marginalized. This includes teachers of color, Indigenous teachers, first generation bilingual teachers, and teachers who have a disability. And for these people, these barriers are even more prevalent on a statistically significant level. If you would like the full report that has all the stats and a complete breakdown of the barriers with recommendations, please scan the barcode. But again, the barriers that we're seeing in the research and what we're learning from the field is they generally fall within these 5 categories: financial burden, curriculum and pedagogy, culture and climate, testing and evaluation, and structural and systemic racism. And we'll go through briefly all 5. So first we have financial burden, growing tuition fees, unpaid student teaching, mounting student debt, meager salaries, and the relentless rise of inflation and living expenses really hinder teachers of color and Indigenous teachers from pursuing a career in education and teaching specifically in California. Over 60% of teachers have to take out a student loan to fund their education, and the average amount borrowed is $55,000. Black and Latina students are more likely to need to take out student loans and are more likely to need more financial aid. In fact, 1 in 5 Black educators currently owe more than $105,000 in student loan debt. This is life-changing debt that our educators are having to start their career with. We really have to make it more affordable for them to join the workforce. Once in the profession, teacher compensation has really no relation to the level of education required or to the labor that teachers are actually performing. California teachers only earn about 78 cents for every dollar earned by other college graduates. Other professions that require a post-baccalaureate degree pay their talent almost 20% more. And on average, California teachers make about 25,000 above minimum living wage, which doesn't leave a lot of room for medical emergencies, your car breaking down, caring for aging parents, paying for your child's college tuition. And again, this is disproportionately so across the board for teachers of color and Indigenous teachers. When we pay teachers less, significantly less than similarly educated professionals, we signal that education and the profession itself isn't really a top value, a top priority, or isn't really valued. And teachers are very well aware of the discrepancy in the level, amount, and demands of their work and what they're not getting paid. Currently, teacher compensation has no relation to the level of education required or to the labor that teachers actually perform. We demand a bachelor's degree, a credential, 600 hours of unpaid student teaching, a mastery of pedagogy, content knowledge, culturally responsiveness, trauma-informed practices, mandated reporting, conflict de-escalation, academic counseling, and just general emotional triage of dealing and managing and caring for children. And then we pay them wages that don't align with any of that. And so teachers are well aware of that fact. The teachers are the lifeline of our future generation. Pay them like you care, is what one of our participants said. Only being paid during school hours, aka when we have students, is the most insane aspect of teaching, especially essentially being paid for about 50 to 60% of the workload that they have. And some of the recommendations that we put in the paper around financial burden is to establish a state-run GI Bill for teachers that covers the tuition, the cost, and living expenses of teachers as they receive their education. Also thinking about expanding the Golden State Teacher Grant to offer more than 25,000 or 20,000 per candidate, and then implementing a California-based public service loan forgiveness program. Structural racism really comes across through a process of predatory inclusion and a general exploitation of under-resourced and unwaged labor that pre-service and in-service teachers have to go through. So what this looks like is, in an effort to meet financial goals, private institutions have a practice of enrolling higher numbers of students than the program can adequately support. And so, as historically white institutions increase their recruitment of racially diverse students, issues of equitable and culturally responsive financial and structural support also arise. Unfortunately, programs, their efforts to increase revenue while simultaneously increasing diversity of the program can exploit pre-service teachers of color and Indigenous teachers in the process. Um, In-service TOSIDs report having been concentrated into schools with unequal and inequitable access to resources. And, this is a quote from a dean in one of these spaces saying that I felt like we were increasing revenue on the backs of students of color because we didn't have the actual supports necessary for them to continue through the program once they got in. Some recommendations that we had for this is to detach the teacher certification process from higher education institutions by considering more LEA-based pathways. Require that there is some type of per pupil spending floor that university-based education programs have, just to ensure that the majority of TEP tuition funding goes directly to meeting the academic and financial needs of the students. And then implementing a reasonable enrollment cap to ensure that institutions have the capacity to provide students with high quality education and receive the supports that they need to finish. Culture and climate was a huge barrier that teachers of color presented. 1 in 5 teachers don't agree that their fellow educators demonstrate a genuine commitment to cultivating diversity, or that their leadership demonstrates a genuine commitment to cultivating diversity. 23% feel that don't agree that they have a sense of belonging at their school, and 35% feel that they don't, that their school doesn't make a genuine effort to involve a diverse group of employees in decision and policies. 42% of all TOSIDs, and when I say TOSIDs, I'm talking about teachers of color, Indigenous teachers, report experiencing racial discrimination at their school site. 60% of Black teachers, 41% of Indigenous teachers, 37% of Asian American and Pacific Islander teachers report feeling uncomfortable expressing themselves as a person of color or an Indigenous person at their school site. Right. And on top of all of that, 60% of Black teachers and 50% of AAPI teachers say that they have experienced racial discrimination at their current job site. And in our research, TOSIDs are experiencing pervasive microaggressions, discrimination, and dehumanizing situations with largely race evasive environments. And race evasiveness is the neglect and or the silencing of the realities of race and racism, and reinforces an idea that race is insignificant. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not really impacting you. Some of our recommendations for addressing this is prioritizing and valuing constructive race-centered conversations in the classroom and around campus, and include students of color in campus and decision making. Create active support and affinity groups for students of color at the higher ed level. So these are pre-service teachers when I'm talking about these students. Have students of color at the table, pre-service teachers, students of color at the table for decisions about campus life and program initiatives. Curriculum and pedagogy also have a big impact on how pre-service teachers experience and internalize the profession. After decades, essentially, of centering the work of white men, teacher preparation programs have been structured to systematically foster culturally white environments. This lack of racially diverse and culturally responsive curriculum and pedagogy in teacher preparation programs and in our K-12 curriculums, along with having to, contend with the outside political pressure and limited support for their pedagogical style, have teachers of color struggling to identify with their coursework and with the work that they have to do in the classroom. They're concerned about the limits that are being placed on their pedagogical autonomy, describing it as horrible to not be allowed to teach in a style that fits our personalities, and feeling forced to follow a script. In our survey, teachers ranked political and ideological attacks as the second highest reason they would consider leaving the profession. This is right after burnout, and this issue is an arising main concern only in the last 4 years. Some of our recommendations for this is to feature culturally sustaining curriculum and pedagogies that are responsive to the experiences of the racially diverse community that are that we're hoping entering into the profession, and also that our teachers are serving, and to promote just general racial literacy in teacher preparation programs, like the capacity to decipher racial grammar that structures hierarchies and frames the narrative of our democracy and republic. And then finally, testing as a barrier. Only 66% of prospective teachers pass the CBES on their first attempt. These first time pass rates vary substantially by race. 79% of white teacher candidates pass on their first attempt, whereas only 52% of Latine and 46% of African American teachers pass on their first try. For elementary school teachers, a quarter of test takers do not pass the RECA the first time and do not retake it within a 3-year period. That number climbs significantly, obviously, for test takers of color, with I think around 34% of those who fail their first time, they don't make another attempt within the next 3 years, indicating that tests are really acting as a gatekeeper for students of color. So some recommendations for this is to allow students to prove basic skills and performance competency through coursework, which we have already made headway on as a state by removing this testing barrier, but also providing embedded test preparation and support into our teacher preparation programs, our coursework, so that students are prepared to take their exiting exams and their credentialing exams. And then also providing some type of financial support for testing via program scholarships, grants, and institutional waivers. I wanted to pull out that, for teachers who are saying that they were going to leave the profession, burnout is the top number one reason. And we've known this for decades. Burnout isn't simply just being tired or overwhelmed or under-resourced. So it is very much about all of those things. But it is really more so about living inside of a system that drains us more than it replenishes us. When teachers are underpaid, when they're undervalued, when they feel unsafe, unsupported, burnout becomes a rational response to irrational conditions. And this is why so many educators are saying that they are considering leaving, not because the work is too hard, but because the system makes it almost impossible to do the work well while also staying whole. And so all of this data really is a warning sign, but also an opportunity and a catalyst for us to acknowledge that the flaw is in the system. The flaws that are in the system are not mysterious or inevitable. It's very much man-made. We can design something better, something that allows folks to be able to show up whole in the full potential and dignity of their humanity. And so to have some racially healthy climates in the teaching profession has to be a non-negotiable. All stakeholders have to hold some level of critical awareness and cultural competency to do this work. This is human-centered work. Um, and the humanness part is what makes it diverse and culturally diverse, racially diverse. And so having that awareness, being culturally competent has to be something that's taught and required in this field. Actively interrogating and removing policies and practices that threaten or erode teachers of color and Indigenous teachers' ability to equitably exist in this profession. And then coming to terms with our role as individuals in a system that has and continues to be structurally biased and racist in a lot of different respects is where we can start in making a difference in turning around not only the teacher shortage, but also making the profession and the working environments of teachers or the learning environments of students. So if we can make that environment more human-centered, more racially conscious, then we're passing it down and floating it into the learning environment for our students.